Yeah, if you don't mind, it is kicked off.
Ходом идет рекламная кампания, будет вступить в ряды польской армии. Было бы желание. А вот чтобы оно появилось, это не пред...
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tyrone, and thank you all for being here. We want to keep this relatively casual, so we do have some slides and some information to go through, but we definitely want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers and just casual conversation. So this is more of a workshop than it is a really formal presentation. And with that, I think I'm going to turn this right over to Johan. He is head of product with Arkio, and he's going to get us kicked off with the basic kind of workflow going directly from Arkio to Spatial.
Thank you very much, and thanks all for being here. So I'd like to give like a small introduction on when starting fully from Arkio and going into Spatial. So the first thing you want to do, and I'm just going to pause this video for a few seconds, you want to make sure that your space that you're making is under 250 by 250 meters. And this is to prevent issues with the skybox, if you want to have a custom skybox, and it also prevents your scene from just being too large and a bit uncomfortable to walk around, because you are going to experience your spaces from a one-to-one scale in Spatial. And this is something that you want to keep in mind when you're making things, is that the scale is important and how things come in to Spatial will be. So you can, if you want to bring in objects from other design tools, you can use our plugins. And if you want to bring in pictures, textures, objects that have custom imagery, you can best bring them in as a 3D model as well. So what you see got brought in over here is a Google Maps picture that got loaded into Arkio using SketchUp, and we also added some other geometries in this model. So just looking a bit at what we're seeing here is a tower that is made fully in Arkio with Arkio geometry, and there's a couple of other objects loaded into the scene that are more custom, that are non-Arkio geometry. Like we have a little Cybertruck loaded into this space. and a couple of custom furniture. But you can think of doing entire buildings from other software. You can bring them into Arkio, and from Arkio you can export to GLTF. So this is the kind of the important step. Once you have something created in Arkio, you brought information into Arkio, you maybe worked on that scene together with some people, you can export that scene to a GLTF or to an OBJ and go via Blender. And that's something that Richard Allen will talk a bit about later. So when you export to GLP or GLTF, you can start Spatial, you can make a new space. And I'd like to start off with a simple grid space here. And that is as simple as bringing in your custom model. So you can upload that model that you just exported. And a good thing to note here is when you're exporting from Arkio, it's best to use a PC or a Mac version of Arkio because you would directly have access to your files. If you would export from your Quest, you would have to connect your Quest to a USB cable. You have to give permission, developers, toggles, like all sorts of stuff you need to do to get your file out of the Quest. But if you use your PC or Mac, you hit export and you could directly drag those files into Spatial via the web client. It would make things a bit easier. You can find the exports that you made from Arkio in your documents folder. And if you are on Mac, it also has an export folder with all the models that you exported. And from there, it's just a matter of selecting the GLB file, bringing it into your spatial scene. And this takes a little moment for it to load. What this will do is it basically puts your 3D model in Spatial as a sculpture or anything that still doesn't have a purpose yet. But you can assign that model to be your environment model. You can click on that model and set it to be the environment. This will start making a new mode for showing a new little preview in the middle of the screen where you see a floor and a small spatial character and the new model that got loaded. Now, when you have that scene, you could select from the side properties to set your model to be 1-to-1 scale. Just rotate it a bit so you can see things a bit better. And what you will do then is just align the model so the little preview that you see of the floor and the spatial preview of the little character. It's very similar to the Arkio 3D props that you placed. So this loading that 1-to-1 scale is important, and then you just align it to the floor level, and that would give you like the starting floor point of that model. Now, once you have that set, you can accept your changes. This will teleport your avatar to the ground, to the correct scale, and then you can make some final adjustments of the model. You can set the floor height to be correct, make some minor adjustments, and this will basically transition your Arkio model to a spatial scene. So now we have that Arkio model that we worked on in Spatial already. And that's pretty straightforward, as you see, like it's not too complex. You can extend this well with a skybox. Now there's some information to be found about custom skyboxes on the Spatial help centers. You can easily make a skybox with some of the help that they put on there, and you load them in a similar way as you did with the Arkio model. You put like a custom image on the skybox, and you can, when you convert it to the environment, you can set it to be the skybox for that environment. Now, as long as your environment is within 200 by 50 by 250, it should all fit within that custom skybox. And I believe, Tyrone, there's also something that you guys are working on supporting bigger skyboxes, right? Yeah. So there's That's perfect. So this is still not 100% like confirmed yet. Sorry for dropping this onto you, but like that's not a problem. So as long as you stay within that area, it should be fine. The model that got loaded, there's some tips I can give. When you're making like Arkio scenes, like you can work, you basically draft cities like in minutes. Like you can really build like a lot of heights, but you want to make sure that the spatial avatars can also reach those points. So what I did here in this tower scene is I added a couple of slanted roofs. So at least you can teleport easily on those slanted roofs. And then from there, you can teleport to the higher parts of the more easily. Because otherwise it will get a bit hard for you to get on the surfaces, spaces that have interior spaces. And yeah, here we see that model loaded. We get to be able to just walk around in it. And yeah, this is as far as your imagination can go, like model interior spaces, exteriors, depending on what you... From there, you can add like a starting point, a spawn point, and this would be the point that everyone will jump into your space, and like this would be a nice starting point then to also start inviting you guys at some point. Now, I think this is the majority of the things that I wanted to talk about. There's a lot more that you can do with just the basics. So there might already be some questions from some people that are here in the audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Now this is awesome. I love Arkio. I've used it before. I love the stuff. And one question is about collision models. So
yeah,
I know how you can make things in Arkio, but then how do you manage the collision model?
So the collision of the geometry gets made automatically. So if the surfaces are horizontal or vertical, the teleport beam and the like the teleport surface in the web client, they will all be calculated from that model. If you want very specific surfaces that are hidden, that are collisions, and like things like colliders for the chairs, there's some other like in-between steps needed, because you would need to first start adding some of that geometry in Blender and assign a certain name to it. And Richard Allen will talk a bit more about some of these processes. I hope
so
that
just to
answers the
clarify,
question. Yeah.
Almost. So just to clarify, what you're saying is that the model itself acts as a collision model as well.
Correct. Yes. So as long as the surfaces are big enough to stand on, and if they're horizontal or vertical, they will act as a wall that you cannot run through, or a balustrade that you cannot fall through, or a floor that you can stand on or teleport on.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Are there other questions about the process of bringing in like the basis from Arkio geometry to Spatial?
What is the latest Revit version that has the plugin with Arkio?
The latest version is 2022. We're currently working on the 2023 version of Revit. That will be expected in a month, hopefully, for the Arkio plugin. So that's actually, it's a good point that you bring up, because the plugins that we have to Revit, Rhino, and SketchUp, they can be like a very nice way to bring things also to Spatial. Because if you have some models from SketchUp and you want to kind of transition some of that geometry because you have set up some things, you can use Arkio as an in-between way. And also nice to mention that the same goes for our Unity plugin. If you have some interesting Unity scenes, you can use Arkio as an in-between step. Now, there are limitations to this approach. You cannot load an entire game world with like 1,000 or millions of polygons, because it needs to be optimized for multi-user and VR. So there's limitations to what you can bring in and the texture sizes. And best is to look at the spatial help pages, because there are some specs mentioned there of how many textures you can bring in and the amount of polygons and the sizes of the models. Were there other questions about the basics to bring in Arkio to Spatial? I think that was mostly it then, right?
I might have something. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
So, hey, Tyrone.
Hey.
People here. The model looks like slightly baked in certain portions and other portions it's not. Is it being baked in Arkio, or do you have to do it elsewhere?
So the baking itself is fully done elsewhere. So in Arkio, the geometry would just come as the base geometry with the base textures that get applied in Arkio. So sometimes in Arkio you see like ambient occlusion and some others to make it more realistic. Unfortunately, that will not come directly to Spatial, but Richard Allen is going to talk a bit about the process of the baking in using Blender.
Yep, let's do that now. And yes, you're right. Some of the spaces, some of the surfaces in here are baked and some of them are not. And that literally was just a amount of time. There are a lot of surfaces in this model. And just didn't get everything baked the way we would like. Look, we have got somebody hanging out up.
Tô me ouvindo,
Ó.
tem outros camaradas.
Yeah. Nice.
Ah, é?
Salut tout le monde.
Where did my
Fala
PDF
aí, galera.
Il y a des Français ici ou quoi?
Não, falando com a galera. Tô tentando interagir aqui.
Is there French here?
Tá muito baixinho, não dá pra ouvir também.
move that video out of the way? Let me bring in. I had the PDF, but I think I just
Hello everybody.
deleted it.
Hello.
Agora sim.
Hello guy.
Não, tá tranquilo, tá ótimo.
Hello. Industria.
Turn on spatial audio. That would be good.
Yeah.
Is no French? No.
Yeah.
Is there French here?
No French here.
No French. Oh, bad. French
Eu tô
is
dentro
very
de um
bad.
anfiteatro que dá vontade até de pegar e sentar aqui.
I have a problem. Oui.
Não, tranquilo, tô brincando.
Okay. Hey guys, I am. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with our next phase. So if you are in the room and could mute yourself, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, I will mute everybody in this space again here in just a moment. Okay, thank you. So Johan just walked through the basic workflow from going directly from Arkio to Spatial. Works
guy.
pretty
Hello.
seamlessly, which was fantastic. What I'm going to do is talk just a little bit more about a slightly more advanced workflow that we used for the Arkio HQ model. Now, before I do that, let me point out that the workflow that Johan just presented is actually on Arkio's website. So if you go to arkio.is/learn, you come across a whole number of workflow worksheets that kind of walk through different types of workflows. And part of that is a Arkio to Spatial workflow that just outlines everything that Johan just demonstrated.
Thank you for bringing that up.
There we go.
Quick
Okay.
question. Are there? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a good question. Are there other platforms that this is possible with? So Spatial, it's possible, But have you tested it with any others like Decentraland or anything else?
It should be possible because the GLB format and the OBJ format are pretty generic formats that you could use in various 3D tools. We haven't tested all of them ourselves, so yeah, we would appreciate if you try it for yourself. You let us know, and but it should be possible.
Brilliant. Thank you.
А мене чутно?
I'm sorry, hello?
I think there was someone talking French.
Okay. Okay.
We're good again. Yes.
Okay, so the advanced workflow starts similarly to what Johan just outlined in the basic workflow. You start with your model created in Arkio. Here you see the Arkio HQ model that was built inside of Arkio. That was then exported out using a number of different formats. And I brought that directly into Rhino because that is a program I am more familiar with when it comes to modeling as an intermediary step to get to Blender. What I did inside of Rhino was I really just wanted to prep the model for texturing. So what you see here is I've taken the basic white model that was imported, and I have now just started to place materials on different surfaces. You'll also notice that I have removed a number of surfaces. So if I go back to the original model that comes in out of Arkio, I deleted a number of surfaces that you do not see in this model. And the reason I did that was because when it comes to texture baking, you really want to reduce the number of surfaces that you're baking on. And so if you don't see it in this model, in this experience, I took it out just to make the model as light as possible. The other thing I did was kind of in a similar vein, sit back down. My avatar gets all excited and decides to stand on the chair. There we go. I'm sitting on a weird spot. Interesting. I think we've got a lot of people on the stage, and so acting a little funny. So, okay, so the next thing that I'm trying to click there we go, click on the PDF, was I also separated out some of the surfaces because of the way I wanted to apply materials to it, right? So the model that I generated in Arkio was solid geometry. I extracted some of those surfaces. For instance, this is the gallery building that you see over beyond. I separated out the surfaces that I knew wanted to have the exterior cladding on it versus the yellow boxes, that's the interior of those kind of pyramidal skylights. Those I wanted to be glowing, so I made those a separate material. Blue in this was kind of illustrating anything that was going to be concrete, and then obviously there's kind of the red element. So I really just kind of separated things out so that when I go to apply textures, I could do that pretty easily. I then brought that model directly into Blender, started to replace out some of my textures. One of the next things that I did was create my HDRI Sky, because I was using a HDRI Sky to do light baking. I wanted to set that up early. There's actually a number of resources that you can get skies for free. Polyhaven has quite a number of skies. Ambient CG has quite a number of skies. In fact, the skybox that is used for this model, I got from Ambient CG. So kind of a shout out for there. I also set up additional lighting. And in this model, everything was lit with emissive surfaces. So all of the lighting that you see throughout this model is either lit with the HDRI Sky or an emissive surface, with the exception of I've got one additional area light in this auditorium. I also set up, as you'll notice in a lot of, as you look around, right, like the Arkio logo that is behind the screen appears to be glowing, and you're seeing some of that glow on the stage itself. If you look out to the auditorium or to the gallery building, the red trim is glowing. That for me was kind of reminiscent of the volcanoes in Iceland, the fiery red. So I really wanted that to have a pop and to glow within the model. So I set that up also with an emissive surface with a low emission, so it's not creating a lot of extra light, but it is definitely reading as kind of a fiery glow in the space. I then set up my UV mapping, applied textures, and did my texture baking. So you're seeing the wall of this space here and the texture map and how that gets baked into the space. It's baked into those maps. And then I set up, Johan talked about the hotspot. So I have set up quite a number of hotspots in this space. There's a good workflow on Spatial's website. One thing that I will point out is the workflow on Spatial's website suggests using spheres. I actually find it's easier to with arrows. So if you, up at the top of the screen, you go to add in your kind of model layout with object mode selected, and you go to add empty arrows, what that does is show you an X, Y, Z. And the reason I find this easier is because the direction that you set is in the negative Y direction. So very clearly, by looking at the orientation of these arrows, I know which way people are going to sit and face. So I recommend using empty arrows. What you have to do is name them, and you see that set up here in this slide, is dash hotspots. That has to be the very last word in your naming convention, and then Arkio will read that as a hotspot and treat it as such, and people sit where they're supposed to. I then exported this all out to GLB as a GLTF 2.0 and brought that into Spatial. Johan walked through how to set up a space. What I'm going to point out right here is I find it really helpful that Spatial has now given you the ability to replace a model. So I recommend setting up your model in your environment early, creating it, and then it's really easy to make an update to the file, re-load it, and then replace it. And basically, it just replaces the environment entirely around you. And it works so well. As you're working through anything, I find it's always kind of a back and forth. You get in here, you test it, you go back, you make tweaks. This makes that process so much easier. A couple more tips that I will point out that I found really helpful was trying to understand orientation. And here's what I found is if the green arrow on this slide, this was a little model that I had created in Rhino and brought directly in just to test orientation with an X, Y, Z coordinate. Green being the Y, red being the X, and blue being the Z coordinate. Bringing that directly into Spatial, here's the way that I found that orientation works. That cube is a 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cube. It automatically, when I created a one-to-one model, it placed itself in the center of that platform, and you're seeing the orientation here. Why does this matter? This matters when you go to place a HDRI Sky. And you want, like if you're using an HDRI Sky to bake the light into your model, and let's say you've got a sunrise like you're seeing in this image right here, well, that sun is going to, it's going to be casting light on your model from a specific direction. You want that model to line up. Okay, can someone please stop clicking through the slides? Thank you. You want that light to line up with your model. So here's what I found is that the center point of your HDRI Sky lines up do X, right? So if I go back to this diagram right here, that X lines up with the middle of the HDRI Sky right here. That allows you to plan ahead and make sure that your orientation of your skybox inside of Blender matches the orientation that it will pick up when you bring it into Spatial. Any questions with that? Like, that's kind of high level, but really trying to kind of lay out a series of breadcrumbs that gets you from that Arkio model to this light baked textured environment. Yeah, I kind of find like if the sun is coming from the wrong place, right? Like creating an environment in Spatial is very much, it's an illusion, but part of making that illusion feel real are things like making sure that the light matches the right direction, right? Like it looks like the sun is the same place as where where it's hitting the buildings. Little details like that, I think, go a long way to making an environment feel real, virtually real. Yeah. Mm. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So maybe Richard Allen, you could talk a bit about, like, I remember that you were going through some of these processes of UV unfolding and like baking the light sources itself. Like, is there anything that was particularly helpful for you to learn about UV unwrapping and how to work with Blender in this way?
Well, I will say that I am relatively new to Blender, only been working with it for probably the last couple months, which is why I still do a lot of the pre-work in Rhino. It's just easier for me to manipulate and move things around. There are probably a number of links that I can share. What we'll do is we'll take these slides that we just put together for this presentation and we'll create a send workflow to live on Arkio's website that takes kind of a slightly more advanced approach. There's probably, yeah, I think it's probably better if I point them to some specific workflows that I found useful for the process.
Yeah.
If there are any specific questions, I could probably answer them or at least stumble through it. It's
Yes.
been a really, and I say that just because what I'm finding is Blender is extremely powerful. Like it can do so much, but it works in a different way that I'm used to with other programs. So it is all a bit of a learning curve for me. And that's just me being open and honest. And I'm doing that, right? Because to let you know that I am still kind of relatively new and I kind of created this space that we have here. So I'm letting you know that so you don't kind of assume that you have to be a master at it to make something happen.
That's a very good motivation. I think, like for maybe some of the people in this room, like you guys have already some experience with Blender. You guys are completely new to all this. Any familiar things you heard so far? Yeah.
I learned Blender for Spatial as well, and I made like a fun like learned something fun with the vertices and the direction of the normals in spatial. So when you have like a normal cube and you only see the material when you are on the right side or on a specific side of the normal. So you can basically make see through things that you only can see from one side. So basically an Easter egg. And I
Okay,
think you cannot.
interesting.
It has no. I think it has no gravity as well. I think you can fall through, like you can fall through a ceiling if the normal is pointing to the wrong side. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
that's a
you
good tip
can.
actually, because it could lead to a potential bug in
I
your
mean,
scene.
because yeah, I got trapped in my own scene, so
Hmm.
I had to leave Spatial because I trapped myself in
Uh,
a sphere.
so this is a workshop, right? So that just actually gives me an idea. I've been trying to think through the best way to make our water walk throughable without actually just importing a separate material. I'm going to try to just
Mm,
flip the normal on it, and
yeah,
see if that doesn't do the trick.
That's a good
yeah,
one indeed. Then we can swim next time.
Yeah.
yeah. And I have another question. Probably the question goes more to Spatial, but I loaded in a model that is way bigger than 250 square meters. Like it's 1 kilometer of 1 kilometer, but I did not load in a sky dome. I load the sky direct into Spatial, like simultaneously with the model, and um, like the material of HDRI Sky, and it worked. But if the floor goes and touches the sphere on the outside, or is bigger, you could walk out of your own HDRI, and then you're again in the forest, like in the default skybox. Is it possible to make another default skybox than the forest one, like just okay, okay, cool.
So very good questions, and interesting to hear people already putting like 1 by 1 kilometer scenes in spatial. Yeah, yeah, indeed. You're about to have a distance. So maybe you should maybe we should bring up again the price involved there. Yes, it is. So I think we still like we are going to be announcing some more information about the actual competition, but the idea it's like it's very similar to what we're seeing here, the Arkio HQ that we put in here. They have a specific program with requirements that's the spatial scene. Yes. And like we'll all be more clear in like the way we're going to jury the designs and how the price money is going to be used. Yes.
Yeah, I think that is it from my point of view. We've got details up on this slide for the HQ Design Challenge for Figment. We'll be continuing to roll out more details over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. Hopefully, a lot of you will be interested in joining that. Was this useful? Was this workshop of value to you? You know, we'd love to kind of plan additional workshops if they are something that the community is interested in.
Eu tô te procurando também, velho.
Yes.
Yes. I think like it will be very interesting also for us to have a bit of a conversation with the community here.
Hi, guys.
To also learn some of the things that you guys are running into, so we can also make this workflow a bit easier.
Hey, I couldn't find the Arkio Discord. I've tried looking for it in the past. I couldn't get through to it. And partly, if there is one now working, that's fantastic. I would love to know where it is. The other thing is that I do like Arkio. I haven't had a chance to learn it on my own following your tutorials. I think that's something that has maybe been growing over time. But what I really wanted to do was access your Discord to find if there's someone there that I can even pay for a one-on-one tutorial on how to get into Arkio, make all the mistakes myself. So anyways, if you do have a Discord, I don't know what the best way to share it is, but I would love to know. And if you've got any, if that's where the pros are, then I'm looking forward to meeting all the Arkio pros in there.
That's a very good question. So you can find the Discord by going to our arkio.is website. There's like on the very bottom of the page, there's a link to our Discord. We can also share it again on the Discord of Spatial. I think we actually shared it once already, but we can do it again. Just for your information, the pros of Arkio and ourselves, like the community is still young. Like we focused on professional architects, so we have a lot of